welcome to our webinar today. The topic for today's webinar is approaches for involving low-income communities with solar. And we have two excellent guest speakers with us today. We also have with us our host for today's webinar, Diana Chase. Diana is a program associate here at the Clean Energy States Alliance, which is the organization that is hosting this webinar. And we're hosting it as part of our Sustainable Solar Education Project, which Diana will explain a bit in just a moment. Before I pass it on to Diana and our guest speakers, I'd like to go over a few quick housekeeping notes. So all of our attendees for this webinar are in listen-only mode. You have a couple of options to join the audio portion of the webinar. You can either call in using your telephone, or you can connect using your computer mic and speakers. If you'd like to minimize the webinar console so that you can see the viewing screen more fully, you can use the little orange arrow or red arrow that you see circled there. You can also use that arrow to expand it if you'd like to see it. A very important note, we ask all of our attendees to submit your questions and your comments, and to do that as you think of them throughout the webinar. You can do that by typing them into the question box on the webinar console and hitting send. And we will be reading through your questions as they come in. We will answer as many questions as time allows at the end. We're aiming to save at least 15 minutes for a Q&A. And we do expect to have a lot of people on the line today, so there should be a lot of questions. To make sure that we get to your question, type it in when you think of it. Don't wait until the very end to type it in. And a final note, this webinar is being recorded. We will email you with a copy of the webinar recording and the slides within about 48 hours, probably this afternoon. And we'll also be posting a copy of the webinar recording on our website, and that's going to be at cisa.org/webinars. And we have many other webinar recordings there as well that you can check out. So, with that out of the way, I would like to pass it over to our host for this webinar, Diana Chase.
Thank you, Samantha. As Sam said, I'm Diana Chase, and I'm a program associate at the Clean Energy States Alliance, or CISA. We're here today to talk about approaches for involving low-income communities with solar. But first, let me just briefly introduce you to CISA. We're a coalition of public energy agencies, mostly state agencies from around the country, working together to advance clean energy. You can see our members here. We're presenting this webinar today as part of our Sustainable Solar Education Project. The Sustainable Solar Education Project, which is funded by a grant from the U.S. Department of Energy Solar Energy Technologies Office, provides information and educational resources to help states and municipalities ensure distributed solar electricity remains consumer-friendly and benefits low and moderate income households. The Sustainable Solar Education Project provides guides, webinars, and other resources. It also has a free monthly newsletter highlighting news from around the country on solar consumer protection and equitability. You can find all of these resources at the link at the bottom of the screen. As part of the Sustainable Solar Education Project, we're producing a series of webinars this fall and winter on low and moderate income solar program design. As part of this series, today's webinar will discuss approaches for involving low-income communities with solar. Our learning objectives for today's webinar are to learn about proven approaches for involving low-income communities with solar, to learn the value of partnering with community members and existing community organizations, and to learn about specific program models that have enabled low-income participation in solar. I'd like to introduce both of our speakers now, and then after I've introduced both of them, we'll move on to the presentations. Our first speaker is Beth Galante. Beth Galante is Vice President of Business Development and Government Relations at PosiGen Solar. She practiced and taught energy and environmental law in Louisiana for 15 years. After Hurricane Katrina, she directed Global Green New Orleans, a nonprofit focused on the sustainable rebuilding of the city to build LEED Platinum net zero homes in the lower Ninth Ward, high-performance schools throughout New Orleans, and green affordable housing statewide. She was named a champion of change by the White House for her sustainable rebuilding efforts in New Orleans. Our second speaker will be Justine Blanchett. Justine Blanchett is Director of Family Services at Grid Alternatives. Justine is a passionate advocate of renewable energy, equity, and sustainable development, and has spent the last 6 years working to make solar affordable and accessible with Grid Alternatives. She has experience in outreach to lower-income communities, both in rural and urban areas, as well as on tribal reservations. As the Director of Family Services, she oversees the work Grid does for and with lower-income families. And with that, I'll turn it over to Beth.
Great. Thank you so much for the introduction, Diana. And thanks to you and Sam and the whole CISA team for the outstanding work that you do. It's also really an honor to be presenting with Grid Alternatives today. Grid's just done amazing work and certainly helped create the opportunity for PosiGen to get started and grow for the last 5 years. So turning it over to give you first and foremost a little introduction to PosiGen and our business model for those of you who are not familiar with us. We started in New Orleans in 2016 with the idea that low-income as well as moderate-income families had really been shut out of the growth of clean energy, primarily due to financial reasons, and certainly in New Orleans specifically and Louisiana, a very high proportion of low-income families who have extraordinarily high utility costs in many areas, as I'll go over a slide momentarily, more than 20% of a low-income homeowner family's income being spent on energy cost. So we utilized, when we got started, and continue to utilize the federal investment tax credit, as well as state support to enable us to provide financing to 100% of homeowners, regardless of their income or their credit score. I won't go into details on our model, but certainly would be more than happy to deep dive with anyone who has questions, either now or after this presentation, about exactly how our model works. But in short, we pay 100% of the costs of the solar equipment and installation, as well as all of the upfront costs of an energy efficiency upgrade, if we can persuade our families to sign up for that as well. Once we've paid for everything and installed it and activated the customer system, they have entered into a 20-year lease arrangement with us where they pay a fixed monthly payment, which includes not just paying us back for the system and upgrade over that 20-year term, but that fixed monthly payment also includes all the costs of insurance, maintenance, monitoring, repairs, including the replacement of the inverter at some point during the term of the lease. We do not require a down payment. We do not bake into any kind of interest rate specifically or any kind of balloon payment or accelerator, unlike most other solar companies in the country. And I believe we are still the only company in the United States that serves low-income families. So part of our growth model has been focusing on this underserved or unserved community, families that just don't fit into traditional market rate financing opportunities. And also by offering a standardized lease and a standardized system, we've been able to drive down our installation costs and costs of business to extremely low margins. So I'll just kind of move on the company's model, just a few more facts. By focusing on that community, we basically have a situation where, but for some wonderful nonprofits and charitable work, such as GRID has provided in so many areas, we don't have market competition. So we focus our marketing efforts on media outlets and neighborhoods and local nonprofits and government partnerships, realizing that we need to go to our customers where they are and where we are likely to get an opportunity to get enough attention and just a little bit of trust so they will give us some of their time to explain what we can do for them and to get them to appreciate that it's not about their income or credit score. Of course, we serve 100% of families, so we'll take higher income customers, but our marketing focus is very, very attentive to trying to reach this lower income segment. We have most of our installations in Louisiana, where we started, concentrated in the greater New Orleans area. We have been in Connecticut for the past 3 years through a wonderful partnership with the Connecticut Green Bank, who you're going to hear from next Tuesday, and I strongly encourage folks to come listen to the amazing work that they have done to try to create inclusive prosperity for all residents of Connecticut. We've also installed in New York and do solar hot water in Florida through a partnership with a utility in Florida, Lakeland Utility, in the northern part of the state. So total, we've done more than 11,000 installations to date and have 157 employees working through our markets. So let's deep dive just a little bit more on the customers. Why we're all here today is to learn more about accessing lower income families to help let them know about opportunities that exist and not just connect with them, which is very challenging in our very media saturated world, but to get them to appreciate that there are options for them to dramatically lower their utility costs. I wanted just to throw out a couple of slides on why we shouldn't ignore low income customers, that kind of giant bottom of the pyramid, BOP as some of the philanthropics refer to it. It's not a community that needs and must rely exclusively on charity. And particularly given the national climate right now and ever thinner budgets, we operate from the philosophy that there are scalable models, and we are proud to have helped create one of what we hope will be many in the coming years that can empower families to access affordable clean energy without having to rely strictly on charitable programs, which are usually underfunded or run out of funding rapidly and are not well advertised to the community. So low-income homeowners obviously are shut out of the traditional carbon or sales markets, but we think that part of our success in connecting with and signing up so many families is that we help them appreciate that we're not a predatory company. We're not going to come in with a really high interest rate like a lot of folks, even if they can access credit, are often subjected to. And even if they were able to qualify and could get a decent rate, we've got that 30% federal tax credit, which often these families don't have enough taxable income to fully monetize. And of course, for our purposes, and something I wanted to drill down further on today's call, it's not just overcoming the fact that usually there's not a good non-predatory financing opportunity, but you're dealing with a group of folks that are extremely reluctant to take on any additional debt. Their home is, of course, almost always their most valuable asset, and they, particularly because we're looking at a 20-year lease obligation, it becomes very challenging to get folks to consider how much money they will save by entering into an arrangement and understanding that that is not going to create an obstacle to selling their home in the future, and not an obstacle where we would come after them for some reason to get the equipment back. So getting in the door is challenge number one. Getting folks to appreciate financing opportunities are their job too, but then getting them to appreciate that it is in their financial best interest and not endangering home ownership is kind of that third obstacle. Just to finish up on our customers, we believe, and I'm sure there's some folks out there that might argue with us, but we at PosiGen believe that part of our success in getting more than 11,000 families signed up in such a short period of time is that we offer a fixed monthly payment, as in what they pay in month 1 of year 1 is what they'll be paying at the end of year 20. Our low-income families tend to have extremely tight budgets, significant to severe, they need to know what that payment's going to be every month because they are often dealing with fixed incomes. We have a lot of retirees, and that gives them a lot of comfort, which they certainly don't get from their existing utility bill, which can, bounces around dramatically and can cause so many challenges, particularly in our extreme weather months, the winter in the Northeast, and obviously in Louisiana, it's about the crazy summer bills. So that confidence we feel is great and gives them a little extra incentive to give us a listen and sign up. And I just always throw in this last thing. We have a lot of utility bill assistance programs with the utilities, all ago, again, never enough budget. But the money that our customers save is spent in the local community, which certainly supports local businesses and really does create that community-wide benefit over time. So I just wanted to throw in a slide there about some of our employees. We try to hire from the local communities we serve. We work very hard to hire representative staff, not just because it's the right thing to do, but when we're hiring in the community, it makes it more likely that the homeowners that we're reaching out to are going to appreciate that and want to support their fellow residents and the good paying jobs that support. I wanted just to put in a few slides on what we're dealing with, and I encourage anybody who hasn't checked out CESA's incredible database and graphs that they made available to run the numbers for your community. You can do it by state, you can do it by city, and you can even drill down on census tracts. It can help guide you on where to focus your outreach efforts. So I will just go through these quickly, but check the slides out. You see the numbers. They're pretty outrageous for Louisiana. We're looking at low-income families spending as much as 22% of their income in Louisiana. And then the drilling down on the hometown of New Orleans here, you're just looking at crazy energy bills here. ACEEE did a study on that included New Orleans last year, which showed we had the second highest energy poverty in the nation. So lots of work to do. Now, focusing on the topic at hand, I wanted just to talk through, and I'm going to spend a lot of time on this slide, so excuse me, but I wanted to talk through our primary processes and strategy for connecting with and involving our lower income communities and families. First of all, we want to focus, of course, on targeting our communities. We want to identify where we have a high number of lower income home ownership. And to be clear, I probably should have made sure I flagged it at the beginning. We, because of the incentive opportunities that we have available to us, we can only serve homeowners at this time, or homeowners that have properties with renters that they're willing to take on that lease responsibility. So I wish we had the solution for the renters here, but for our purposes, focusing just on the homeownership population. hope that will change with incentive opportunities in the future. So we want to identify those communities that have high homeownership rates, and of course high utility rates, and high average monthly utility costs. And of course, just to cut to the chase, just because an area has low kilowatt per hour costs certainly does not mean that they don't have extraordinarily high monthly utility bills. And again, New Orleans is the perfect example. We have an 11 cents rate here, but as you saw from that earlier slide, we have some of the highest energy costs in the nation. And the reason for that is that third identification piece, older building stock. Our older homeowners and certainly renters tend to live in very old housing stock in a lot of areas. Not only are the buildings old, but they have a lot of deferred maintenance because they don't have the financial wherewithal to make normal improvements. So we're often dealing with very leaky homes that have not been properly weatherized, that don't have adequate insulation, and that have HVAC equipment that is in poor condition, is not serviced regularly, and or is functionally obsolete in a lot of cases. We see a lot of duct taped and bubble-gummed situations in some of our homes, and it's certainly a challenge for most of the lower income and up into the moderate income families. The older building stock for PosiGen's model, because we do energy efficiency as well, gives us an opportunity to focus on the weatherization opportunity there, so we can make sure that we get them what they need. Connecting with state and local governments is critical, as well as community nonprofits and small businesses, because we need their education and support to help us focus on outreach to low-income homeowners. None of them want to hear from a for-profit trying to sell them something. Most of them have had a bad experience in the past, or they certainly have a friend, family member, coworker who did. So it is critical that we nurture those networks so they can appreciate what we offer and they can help advocate. When you get started with outreach, you want to get those early adopters and get them installed, and then get them to become your sales team, frankly. And again, I know that I speak the language of for-profit here, but your constituents can become your very best advocates. So when we started in New Orleans, the first few installations we did, we got those families to turn around and host house parties. Was like incredible, because they got their neighbors in, they saw what we had done for them, they showed off their utility bills, and they continue to be a major source of sales for our efforts in our markets. Hire locally, I already mentioned. Partner with state and local governments, those community groups, and local contractors. When I talked first about connecting with them when you kind of get started, some of those partnerships are going to bear fruit. And it's time consuming, of course, to build those relationships, but there's no better way to get the attention and trust of your lower income families so that you have an opportunity to show them why solar and energy efficiency is a good commitment, a good investment for them and their family's financial future. We focus on limited media budget that we have. We're kind of lean and mean here, but we do work very hard to try and place ads where our communities are going to have eyes and ears. And the Connecticut Green Bank can talk and has some great information on how you identify where those eyes and ears are going to be and make sure that you invest your limited dollars in those communities. And it's not rocket science. It's kind of we would all think it, but it's been very successful to us to look at the weekly newspapers in the community, local radio. Weather apps are super popular and obviously topical for what we're trying to do here, and folks know that when the temperature gets extreme, their utility bills go up, and public transportation. And then, of course, focusing on your customer base. I can tell you right now that that is the #1 source of sales for PosiGen, is our existing customers, are seeing benefits, they're seeing savings, their houses are more comfortable, quieter, and they become our best advocates. So referrals are often, in some months, 50% of our sales, and obviously we're giving them a good product, so that makes it easier for them to focus. And just to wrap up with one example, and again, Greenbank's going to present on this next week. This is a census tract map that we use for marketing for an event that we had last night in Hartford. And sorry, I'll jump over that now. Our average customer in Connecticut is saving $486. Sorry, I've been talking a little long, so I'm going to jump that for now. This is the event we had last night in partnership with Habitat for Humanity in Hartford and Operation Fuel, as well as the Connecticut Green Bank. We got 20 appointments from this event, and our average sales conclusion from appointments is 40%. So from this one event, we should expect about 8 sales. And again, it is the fact that we're partnered with Habitat, Operation Fuel, who have been doing amazing work in the community for many years, that we get an opportunity to sit at a kitchen table with a family and explain to them why solar and energy efficiency is a good investment for those families. So I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Beth. Next, we're going to turn it over to Justine Blanchett from Grid Alternatives. Justine?
Yes, good morning and good afternoon. I want to thank CISA for holding this webinar and Beth for a really great presentation that highlights some of the barriers and needs of low-income communities. My name is Justine Blanchett, and I have the pleasure of working for Grid Alternatives. And as was mentioned earlier, I have 6 years doing outreach for low-income communities, both in urban and rural areas, as well as on tribal reservations. So I'm hoping that today, both PosiGen's and Grid's presentation will help build a better pipeline for lower income communities and ensure they have access to solar. Now, if it isn't self-evident that low-income communities should benefit from the transition to renewable energy, here are 4 key reasons that we think make the case. The first one is, and Beth mentioned it as well, is families often spend 4 times more on their income on energy costs. So you can do the math for yourself, multiply it by 4 and see where you land, and that'll make a case really quickly. Despite that, lower income communities are underserved in the growing solar industry, but yet need the benefits the most. Now, another reason and thing to highlight with low-income solar is that they face often additional barriers to access, both on the recipient side of solar systems, but also on the job side. That might be money or credit scores, time, education, including access to education, but also home repairs can be a huge barrier to receiving a solar system. And last but not least, often lower income communities are highly impacted by pollution and climate change, both in their homes and in their workplace. So if you haven't heard about Grid Alternatives, we are the nation's largest nonprofit solar installer. We work both in the single-family sphere as well as the multifamily sphere, and now in community solar as well. We operate in California, Colorado, Mid-Atlantic region, but also have 2 other programs, which is our National Tribal Program, which we offer across the United States, and our international program, and we serve Nicaragua, Nepal, and recently also Mexico. Now, the vision that drives our work as a nonprofit organization is to ensure that lower income communities and the communities most impacted by climate change are included and benefit from the transition to clean and renewable energy. So that means that we make renewable energy and technology and job training accessible to underserved communities. Our work is basically driven by a people-first approach. We help people save on their electric bill we help people get jobs and training, and at the same time, while doing that, we also are helping the planet. Now, since 2004, we have had a growing impact, and you can see here the numbers in terms of, you know, the solar installed. We've basically displaced small to medium-sized coal power plants, depending on where in the country you're located. But installing solar isn't the only part of our model. Ensuring that people have access to jobs and training and free training is really important to grid alternatives as well. So another key thing in our work is we focus on ensuring that we can adapt to needs, but also increase who we serve. So although we started on the single family side, as you heard, we've grown into the multifamily and community solar sphere because there's a need from tenants as well. Now, our approach is unique, I think, in many ways, both in the way we do outreach and the way we provide our service. As a mission-driven nonprofit, we are constantly seeking to remove barriers to access, but also the affordability piece. So that means that we go where the client is, we speak their language, we are also sensitive to their culture. A high and important aspect of GRID's work is educating throughout, not only in the beginning, but throughout the process and all the way through the post-installation. And that will help low-income communities and families make an informed decision. We can provide them the service, but they have to decide that it makes sense for their families. We also take care of everything, the paperwork, and anything that needs to be done, both on the solar side, but also by connecting them to energy efficiency services and education. And in doing all of this, we are partnering with other entities to ensure that we are reaching everyone at all levels. And that means from community-based organization all the way to policymakers. That ensures that everyone is represented and everyone is reached. And last, or not last, but another really, really important part of Grid Alternatives work is that we leverage funds to maximize the savings for the families. That means there's not only no upfront costs, but there's also no cost at all. And that means that there's no financial liability. So as a nonprofit, that means that Grid Alternatives fundraises and leverages any funds that we can so that these families can truly benefit in the long term and the short term. And a few other things that distinguish us are the fact that we are growing and adapting to need, and we are also offering the workforce development piece in every single one of our installation. So that helps the growing solar industry meets good people that need jobs, including people from the communities we serve. Now, what that means in practice, we have a couple of examples of how we've successfully deployed solar in low-income communities. The first one I wanted to sort of talk about is California. California has two rebate programs specifically for lower-income communities. The first one is the Single Family Affordable Solar Homes Program, or SASH for short, and the other one is the Low Income Weatherization Program, LIWIP. And both of these programs are designed in similar fashions to ensure that low-income communities both have access and can afford the solar. So the rebates can cover up to 70% of the system cost, and then Grid will layer any funding that we can provide to make sure that there's zero cost to the family. Additional important aspects of these programs is they offer a lot of consumer protection, including a minimum floor saving of 50%, although we tend to shoot for 75 to 80% on average savings, and that's from day one and throughout the lifetime of the system. There's a heavy component around energy efficiency education and also access to implementation services. And finally, the workforce development that is a big part of Grid Alternatives' triple bottom line is also integrated into those programs. So in Grid Alternatives work, the partnership approach is key to success, And so building on the California SASH and LIWIP program, Grid Alternatives is working with the City of Richmond to provide additional solar services and other services to their citizens. And so that means that Grid partnered with the city to do joint community outreach and education to all the folks in the city of Richmond. But the city of Richmond also provided gap financing because they wanted to make sure that financing wasn't a struggle in providing grid services to the people of the city of Richmond. And finally, a big barrier to Grid's work in lower income communities in that city was home repairs and re-roofing. So in layering these services, Grid and the city of Richmond were able to basically take away most or the biggest barrier to solar for their citizens. Now, another example I'd like to provide today is the example of community solar. So our Colorado office has partnered with various rural electric cooperatives and utilities, and in this format, it would take, you can see on the picture is we do community solar, and in this way we're able to serve not only homeowners but also tenants. And so to be able to do this successfully, our Colorado office has to partner on the outreach side to make sure that they can reach all the constituents of those utilities and also leverage the trust that the cooperatives enjoy with their clients. And in developing these partnerships and these models, the rural electric cooperatives will own the solar system, and Grid ensures that they save as much as possible. We target about 50% savings, which the families will see directly on the savings on their bill. Now, in line with Grid's mission and vision, we always integrate a sweat equity and workforce development in these models, but also we ensure that the model is sustainable in the long term, both for the cooperative and the family, so they can continue to save over the lifetime of the system. Now, anyone who might be considering a program for lower income families, we would urge you to consider some of these best practices that we've highlighted. The first one is making sure that you're getting input from key stakeholders. What the needs and barriers in one community might be very different from another. So really understanding who you're serving and how you can help them is essential to a good and successful program. As Beth mentioned, a lot of lower income communities need extra protection from predatory lending and other scams of sorts. And so ensuring that there is integrated consumer protection, but also education both in the statute and design will help not only in the adoption, but in the protection of the more vulnerable families. The third best practice that I'd like to highlight here is ensuring that benefits are maximized for low-income communities. In Grid's model, that is achieved through zero cost, zero liability, and maximized savings. So if you want to repeat that model, we would recommend that ensuring that there's no cost to the family, but also thinking of maximizing the benefits and the protections around insurance and other, equipment replacements and things of that sort. The fourth important best practice that I want to highlight is the need for deep community partnerships. This goes in line a little bit with the first one, where you really need to understand and work with the people that are on the ground, that know the needs of their community, that know the challenges that are faced, to ensure that you can have a successful program. Now, solar is only a piece of the picture, and in Grid Alternatives model, we offer also energy efficiency education, and then, as I mentioned earlier, we layer other services and partner with other organizations to ensure that we can really holistically help the families. So tap into, other services, integrate it into the program if you can, if the money's there, so that the benefits of solar and other services can be brought to these families and multiple bottom lines can be met. And finally, a last thing to consider in the implementation is what additional barriers to access might exist in the specific community you are serving. If they're homeowners, it's different from renters. If they live in one area, it might be different from another. So really understand who you are serving. And so on that note, I'd like to invite you to come and visit LowIncomeSolar.org. It's a solar policy guide developed by Grid Alternatives in partnership with Vote Solar and Race Forward, who is formerly known as the Center for Social Inclusion. And we are making this available at no cost to anyone interested. It includes our 5 guiding principles, which I covered in my presentation, as well as a policy toolbox, best practices, and also some sample successful models and impact across the United States. So LowIncomeSolar.org is available to anyone interested. Please visit us. And finally, if you have any questions for me, my email is here. I want to thank you for your time today, and I'm looking forward to questions. Our website is gridalternatives.org.
Thank you very much, Justine. We have a bunch of questions from our audience, and we're not going to have time to get to all of them, but we'll get to as many as we can. Before we do that, I just want to mention a couple of things. First, Justine mentioned the low-income community solar projects that Grid was involved in managing in Colorado. I want to let everyone know that we at CISA had a webinar about that project last month, and you can find it if you go to our website. You can find the recording of that at www.cisa.org and look under webinars if you're interested in knowing more about that project. I also want to say, Beth mentioned a database that was very helpful. She said it was a CISA database. I believe that's actually a DOE Celica database, and if someone in the group wanted to send me a link to that, we would pass it along to the rest of our group, the rest of the group in our follow-up email. I've got someone saying she will send that to me, and then we can share it with everyone else. So with that, let me get to the questions. First, for Beth, I had a couple of questions, and I'll ask both of them together. One was, would PosiGen's model work in states that do not have third-party ownership? And the other one was, you mentioned installing in Florida where solar PPAs are illegal. How do you go about financing for low income in this situation and in other states where there are policy barriers like this?
Right. Yeah, good questions. First, to the third-party ownership question. We cannot offer our services in those states at this time. Our ability to provide 100% financing, basically buying and installing everything up front, is dependent upon us or our investors being able to retain ownership of the systems and basically use that income stream portfolio to both pay back all of the upfront costs, but to enable them to make some profit, so they want to do business with us. So unfortunately, that is a complete barrier right now. But we understand a lot of states are moving to address that. And for any of you out there working on the issue, certainly focusing on low-income families and how this is functionally really the only opportunity for many of these families to basically get someone else to pay all of the costs and not put them in a position of trying to get financing or being able to get financing at, often really, really crummy rates. To the second question, in Florida, Our partnership there is to install solar hot water systems, and it is run through the utility program there. So it's an on-bill opportunity, and functionally we are just the back of nameplate provider. So it is Lakeland Utilities hot water program. It is an on-bill repayment, and we are just behind the plate there. We would love to do more than that. Certainly, we have no pride of authorship or ownership, and we are very hopeful at some point to find other progressive utilities who want to become leaders in serving low-income families with solar. And anybody out there seeing any bandwidth or interest, real interest, not just let's have some meetings and nothing happens, we would be happy to talk about that opportunity further.
Thank you, Beth. Our next question is for Justine. Can you speak a little more about your consumer protection and education efforts? How do you determine what from and how to protect consumers? What type of outreach or input is solicited to gather this information?
Great question, thank you. I think there's two parts to it. Grid alternatives in supporting legislation, we always consider how the consumer may be protected. So in both the statute and program design, we might recommend that there be limited financial liability or none at all, ideally. Ensuring, I mentioned, maximizing benefits. So in programs that we support and internally also as an organization, we aim to at least for a floor of 50%, but we're actually going higher to ensure that it's really benefiting the family. Additional consumer protections in statutes might include not putting liens on homes, for example. Now, that would be in the program design, but in the work that we do as well, we include a lot of education. So each family is assigned an outreach coordinator that will basically be there throughout the entire process. They will present the program, explain, answer their questions, and start with an application, but also if any questions come up or concerns throughout the process, that person will always be the first point of contact. And that education continues throughout what is the next phase, which is we do have to sign a contract. And so the outreach coordinator meets with the person often either in their place of work or their home or whatever's convenient to ensure that they're not challenged by transportation or time. And it does, the education does continue throughout after the installation. So it is a lot of time spent one-on-one with these families to ensure not only they feel comfortable and trust that Grid Alternatives has their best interest in mind, but also they feel they can make an informed decision for their family. And within their own process, we actually check that each system that we're installing makes economic sense before presenting it to families. Even though there's no costs, we want to make sure that they're not just saving right now, but they're saving in the long term if, for example, they need to re-roof. So I'm hoping that answered the question, but basically both education and consumer protection should be addressed in the program and the statutes, but also ideally in the organization and the way they conduct their work.
Great, thank you. Our next question is for Beth. What portion of the PosiGen PV projects also include weatherization and energy efficiency upgrades? And does that differ by the state where you're operating?
We push very hard for all of our customers to get the energy efficiency upgrade as well, and we incentivize them to do that by offering a net savings guarantee in the first year, because I ran New Orleans Better Buildings program for years, and I know there are energy efficiency wonks out there who know that the most bang for your buck is going to be making sure that you do that energy efficiency upgrade. So we get more than 90% of our families go ahead and choose the energy efficiency adder, which is an extra $10 a month to provide the upfront financing for that. We do lose families when we get in the house, and kind of to some of what Justine was saying, if we go into a home and there's an air quality problem, often because of combustion, appliances in the home, or some other reason that we cannot do the upgrade, then we do have some loss from that, because unfortunately we're only able to do an energy efficiency upgrade and don't have the budget to address significant health and safety concerns. But of course we give them the audit for free if we cancel the contract, and they are on notice if there is a health issue, and specifically what the carbon monoxide readings or whatever the challenge would be. So they at least have that knowledge, and we try to direct them to community resources to address that. But to the question, we've got more than 90% of our families do choose that upgrade.
Great, thank you. We have another question for Grid here, for Justine. Just asking for a clarification. Grid customers don't pay anything at all, is that correct? And then I'll just add, and where does the money come from to pay for installations?
That's correct. Grid customers don't pay anything, and that ties into the previous question I got, which is part of the consumer protection. When there's no cost either upfront or at all, that obviously leads to zero financial liability and very little to no risk in serving those families. And the way we're able to cover that cost really depends on the landscape. So I gave the example in California of the SASH and CAP program, but we basically layer rebates if they're available, state, local. We also layer other types of funding sources such as fundraising, equipment donations, partnerships with other organizations, and also the federal tax credits in some states. So it's really a hodgepodge to make it happen and make sure the family doesn't have a cost.
Okay, great, thank you. And I have actually a very similar question here for PosiGen, which is for Beth, which is, how does PosiGen finance their installations? Is it all done through a green bank model, and has access to capital been a challenge for PosiGen?
So we get our financing from several different channels, predominantly the 30% federal tax credit. In Louisiana, we had at one point a 50% state tax credit, and in Connecticut, it is through Connecticut Green Bank support and the state solar incentive. They basically, to help stimulate the low-income service market, doubled the traditional solar incentive in Connecticut. So those two sources, and then we own the equipment, as we discussed earlier. So that has value, obviously, and that provides leverage financing opportunity. So that's the second big pot of funding. And then the third one is, of course, the revenue stream from our portfolio. So we've got more than 10,000 families who are making monthly payments now, and that basically goes back into helping provide the upfront financing for future installations. So I can drill down a lot deeper on that, but for purposes of this call, it's basically those three sources.
Thank you, Beth. Justine, someone is wondering, how does, and I apologize because I know we're sort of getting away from the issue of community engagement here, but the questions we're getting seem to indicate a little more of an interest from the audience in the business model side of things, or how the money works. So the question I'm going to ask you now is, how does Grid Alternatives monetize federal tax credits?
Well, I hope I can answer that one quickly. So Grid Alternatives as a nonprofit obviously does not have a tax appetite, and our families rarely do, and since it's no costs, they can't really leverage it anyway. So Grid Alternatives partners with, and right now with Sunrun, to leverage the tax credits, and we offer in some cases what's called a prepaid power purchase agreement, where Grid pays upfront for everything using all the funding sources that we have available to us, and the family gets a PPA like anyone in the solar industry, but has no payments. So they're basically, enjoying a worry-free system that is insured, has no cost repairs and maintenance for 20 years, just like any other solar customers. But the biggest barrier that Grid is overcoming is the cost and credit scores that they may not meet.
Great, thank you. And I'm going to now ask two questions to Beth, which I think are somewhat related. The first is, how is the fixed rate contract arranged in circumstances where the homeowner may move or sell their home? And the second question is, how do you handle retrieving your equipment in the event of a foreclosure? When installing the equipment, do you file a lien on the property to protect your interests in the equipment?
Sure, great questions, and of course, one of the first we usually get asked. The equipment runs with a lien on the home. So if the family is moving or selling the home, the obligation runs with the purchaser of the home. The purchaser has the choice of whether they want to just continue the fixed monthly payment. They can roll all of the payments into their new mortgage, and we do get a majority of our purchasers who choose that option. And of course, we try to make that financially attractive to them by offering a discount for them to choose that. Or if they just don't want it, then we will come remove the equipment and repair the roof. And that leads me to the second issue. If they don't pay, we do have an extremely low default rate. It is less than 1.5% right now, but if they stop making payments and we can't work something out, we will come remove the equipment, repair the roof, and then we will redeploy the system, since we own it, for another homeowner, whether with a discounted lease or a sale, which of course we do as well. And that tends to be kind of installation specific, and certainly depending on what the requirements of the various incentives are.
Great, thank you. We're getting very close to the top of the hour, and I'm just going to ask one or two more questions here. This question is for Justine. Of the people that Grid has trained, have many of them ended up with permanent jobs in the solar industry, or do you know how many of them have ended up with permanent jobs in the solar industry?
I actually don't have a number, but would be happy if that person wants to email me to connect them with the right person. Grid is trying to bridge the gap between the classroom and jobs. So yes, a lot of our job seekers get connected to the solar industry and to jobs. I don't know exactly how many, but that is definitely part of our work and mission. And how that's done is through us connecting with companies and putting up job fairs and making sure that trainees get the right training that works, that meets the need of the solar industry.
Okay, great. I'm going to ask one final question. This is for Beth. How do you choose which state to expand to next?
We are certainly looking to focus on states that have some supportive incentive, whether it's just general solar incentive or, ideally a low-income focus. So right now we are doing sales in New Jersey to get the first batch of homeowners installed there and allow us to, start to ramp up. Our intent is to open there early next year. Because we are already in the Northeast and there are a lot of states that do have some incentive. We try to work lean and mean, so we are looking at trying to expand in discussions with several other states and a few city governments about starting installations there. But having said that, we are certainly looking at other great opportunities. California, of course, is amazing and continues to be in so many ways a leader, certainly with the numbers and their work with grid alternatives, and we would be thrilled to explore opportunities to go there. But also looking like at up-and-comers. Illinois is certainly at so much buzz and excitement about the program coming online there next year. Nevada coming back online. But to the question, we are trying to look at where the incentive is the most generous to help us start to ramp up there and convince our investors, frankly, to support us in opening office there. The easy entry is the Northeast. I wish I could say the Southeast, but given the lack of incentives in this part of the country, that becomes a challenge. But also anywhere that low-income families have very high monthly utility costs, our model can work. It takes a little more time and attention to be very mindful of the bottom line, so we can cost effectively do that. But certainly looking at the monthly utility costs around the country, our model can work in many, many states and many cities.
Thank you. And thanks very much to both Beth and Justine. I'm afraid we're really out of time. In fact, I've run over here. So we're going to wrap it up. And I apologize again for not being able to get to all the questions. There were a lot of them. I do encourage people with more questions or whose questions did not get answered to get in touch with the presenters directly. They've both included their emails in their presentations, and of course we'll be sending you all a link to a recording of the webinar so you'll be able to see what their emails are. So thank you very much to our presenters and to all of you for tuning into our webinar today. I'm going to turn things back over to Samantha for some final words.
Great. Thank you, Diana. And thank you very much to Justine and Beth for your presentations and to everyone for attending. We hope that you will be able to attend a couple of upcoming webinars that we have coming up in December. The first will be on Tuesday, December 5th, and that is on Connecticut's low and moderate income solar customer segmentation analysis. And then on December 14th, we have a follow-up discussion on customer acquisition for LMI solar programs. And for that webinar on December 14th, we will be joined again by Beth and by someone from Grid Alternatives as well, possibly Justine. So we hope you can join us for those. Like this webinar, those are free, and you can register at cisa.org/webinars. And with that, I will leave you with some contact information for our host for this webinar, Diana Chase, and also I just want to point to our web address for the Sustainable Solar Education Project. We have a lot more resources on there, reports, other webinars, videos, a lot of stuff that you may find useful. So please do check it out, and you can also find us on Facebook and Twitter. So we hope to see you at our upcoming webinars, and thanks for coming to this one. Bye, everybody.